Somewhere in a library archive, a 1706 map doesn't show Russia, China, or Mongolia. Instead, one word stretches across the Eurasian continent: Tartaria. Millions online believe this is a lost global empire, buried under mud and erased by a vast conspiracy. Tonight, we are going to look past the internet rumors and weigh these claims directly against the physical and archival evidence. Because while the internet's conclusions might sound wild to historians, the starting point of this mystery is undeniably real. That map exists, and that massive label is right there in ink. Between the 1500s and the early 1800s, Tartaria was standard European geography, appearing on hundreds of maps spanning 3 centuries. And it makes sense why people get suspicious when they track it over time. An area covering a quarter of the globe simply fades out from maps, without any war or recorded societal collapse to explain where it went. That unexplained cartographic vanishing act created a massive void. And that empty space is exactly where a modern conspiracy took root. The truth starts centuries before those maps were drawn, with the word Tatar. This was the actual name for the nomadic and semi-nomadic peoples of the Eurasian steppe, some of whom joined the Mongol Confederation under Genghis Khan in the 13th century. When those Mongol invasions reached the borders of medieval Europe, terrified locals modified the word. They added an R to intentionally associate these unknown Eastern groups with Tartarus, the hell of Greek mythology. Generations later, European cartographers were tasked with drawing maps of deep Asia, but they had almost zero reliable on-the-ground data. They had to rely on second-hand merchant rumors and missionary letters. Rather than leaving expensive, commissioned maps totally blank, cartographers used Tartary as a geographical placeholder. It was a catch-all label for territories they hadn't surveyed yet, similar to how early maps used vague terms like Scythia. The massive labels spanned nearly a quarter of the continent because European cartographers simply didn't know where one culture ended and another began. That region was never an empty wasteland. 18th century sources, like early encyclopedias, show that parts of this territory were governed by real, functioning states, like the Khanates of Bokhara and Khiva, complete with established trade networks. These individual states, along with Chinese and Russian frontier provinces, generated extensive diplomatic records. We can still read their treaties and correspondence in state archives today. The historical record clearly shows a diverse collection of separate, documented nations. The internet myth ignores this in favor of a single monolith that never existed. The theory's most visual claim centers on grand domed buildings, like capitals and train stations. Believers argue that their striking similarities across different continents prove they were all built by one lost global civilization. Architectural historians have a thoroughly documented explanation: neoclassicism. Starting in the mid-1700s, a shared global design movement took off, inspiring architects across the world to use the exact same classical vocabulary of columns, domes, and symmetry. This design trend wasn't secretive or mysterious. We have the original blueprints, the construction contracts, and the names of the architects who were independently commissioned to build these structures. There is also a documented explanation for the photos of so-called duplicate cities. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, temporary neoclassical white cities were constructed entirely from scratch, specifically for international World's Fairs. Shared architectural styles across continents are the byproduct of a documented international design trend. The most extreme branch of the theory claims a global mud flood buried advanced cities, leaving only their upper levels visible above modern sidewalks. Cities absolutely do rise over time, but we have the engineering records to show how and why. In the 19th century, places like Chicago deliberately and mechanically jacked up their buildings and raised their street levels to fix major sewage and flooding problems. Furthermore, geologists have surveyed the Earth and found nodal incremental urban buildup, distinct strata of layered pavement and foundations. They have never found the thick physical sediment layer that a sudden global mud event would leave behind. The mud flood narrative takes a localized, easily verifiable phenomenon, cities slowly building up over centuries, and fabricates a global cataclysm without physical evidence. So if there was no mud flood and no erased empire, why did that massive label disappear? Because scientific expeditions finally mapped the interior of Asia. Once explorers gathered on-the-ground data, cartographers replaced the generic placeholder with precise regions like Siberia, Turkestan, and Manchuria. The word simply became outdated. It faded away as geographical knowledge improved, exactly the same way broad terms like the Orient or Indian Territory vanished from modern maps once we had better information. When we weigh the evidence, the conspiracy relies on old maps and visual similarities in architecture. Standing against it are centuries of dated construction records, surviving diplomatic archives, and global geological surveys. The word and the regional territories were factual. However, the technologically supreme global empire is a modern invention. The Tartaria mystery is what happens when modern audiences find a map from the past but forget how to read the placeholders that the mapmakers left behind.